everyone. Today we'll be looking at communication as it relates to business. Most people desire to go into one form of business or the other, especially with the paucity of white collar jobs nowadays. We hear of people losing jobs day in, day out. So the ultimate for most people is to go into business. It is therefore imperative that in preparing for business, we are well aware of what communication in business is all about. We'll be starting off with having a general knowledge of what communication is as we go through this topic today. As we look at the topic communication on a general note in this module, it is hoped that at the end of the session, every participant will be able to define communication, explain the different forms, describe the process, and mention the different features of communication. One basic thing about human interactions is that it cannot happen without communication. Communication is therefore the bedrock of all relationships that we are engaged in, whether at work, at home, with our children, our husbands, our colleagues. So in communicating, there's an exchange of information. There has to be a message that is being passed across when you are communicating, and also an exchange of feelings through words, action, and objects. For communication to be effective, it has to be two-way, as that enhances understanding. When I pass a message across to you, you give me a feedback, and that tells me that you have understood the information that I've given you. Communication can be verbal, that is via words and written documents, or non-verbal through body language. There are various forms of communication. We have intrapersonal communication, which is communicating with oneself through our thoughts. We have interpersonal with few people. We have mass communication, when we talk to a large number of people, like that which happens when we are on TV and the like. And then there's organizational communication, which is the sharing of information within an organization. Communication follows a process, and that process begins with an idea by someone that has a message to send, and is called the initiator. The initiator must decide on what message he wants to pass across. He must know why he's passing the message across, what's his intention, what does he want to achieve by passing that message across. He must know where he's going to pass the message across, when will he pass that message across in such a way that it will be most relevant for the recipient, and how is the message that is going to pass across sent to the receiver. After making those decisions, he also needs to encode the message. That is, he needs to choose an appropriate language that the receiver can decode, that is, the receiver can understand. It doesn't make sense to send a message in a language that the person that receives it does not know what you are talking about. It's like me sending a message to somebody in French, and I know the person doesn't speak French. So the initiator must use an appropriate language. Another aspect of the communication process is transmission, and it is very critical. What medium will be used that will effectively transmit the message as intended to the receiver? Will it be verbal or written? And what channel will be most appropriate for transmitting this message? Am I going to send it via WhatsApp? Am I going to make a phone call? Those are important decisions that the initiator takes into consideration when he wants to send a message. The receipt of the message by the intended receiver after the message has been transmitted is a stage in the communication process that has to be paid attention to. The recipient must be available and ensure that his physical abilities are ready to receive the message. Even if the message is going to be received electronically, the gadget must be in good working condition. After receiving the message, the receiver has to decode that message. He needs to interpret that message. And this can only happen if he understands the message that has been sent. This is an important aspect of the communication process. The receiver must understand and make meaning of the message that has been sent so as to be able to act on it. Feedback is another crucial aspect of the communication process. Feedback involves giving a message back after you have received the message to show that you have understood the message that was sent initially. Communication is a two-way process. If there is no feedback, the process is incomplete. Providing feedback by taking action on the message received is based on the understanding of the information that has been received, and that is very necessary in the communication process. This slide is a visual representation of our discussion in the previous slide. It starts with the idea generation by the initiator, who can be the speaker through the spoken word, a writer through the written word, or an actor through his actions. The message is encoded, is transmitted through a medium, and is received by a receiver who could be the listener to the spoken word, the reader of the written word, and the audience that watched an actor perform. Thereafter, feedback is given. And then the process begins again. The person who gives the feedback now becomes the initiator of an idea because he's giving a feedback on the previous message that he has received. And then he passes that message through a medium. It is received by the former initiator, who is now the receiver. So that process becomes complete. We have noted that communication can be verbal or non-verbal. When it is verbal or oral, it is a direct face-to-face medium of communication, and it allows for an instant exchange of ideas, opinions, views, and of course you get immediate feedback from those that are present and involved in the discussion. It involves body language such as gestures and facial expression. All these make it easier to understand what is being discussed. However, in a situation where there are many people involved in the discussion, decision making may be negatively impacted because so many people want to talk at the same time, and to reach a consensus may be difficult. Moreover, because there's no record of discussions, decisions may be contested. Written communication, on the other hand, is documented, and then there is evidence when you send out a written communication that it was received by somebody. Immediate exchange of ideas and feedback is usually not possible with written communication, because when you send out a written communication, you have to wait for the feedback, the person to read the communication and get back to you. Note that the operative word here is immediate. There is no immediate feedback, but there should be feedback. As for visual communication, it enhances and simplifies oral or written communication. The information is presented in pictorial form. Take, for instance, pictures in a storybook that is meant for children. It enhances the information that has been written in the storybook and makes the understanding easier for the child. In this module, we'll be looking at communication within the context of an organization, and expect that a better understanding of the concept would have been obtained at the end of the session. Communication within an organization. The formal route of communication within an organization can be downward. That's from management to employees. It can be upward from employees to the management. It can be lateral between colleagues, and it can be diagonal between managers and workers in different functional divisions of the organization. As stated in the previous slide, there are 4 formal routes of communication within an organization, and this is based on the organogram of the organization or its organizational structure. From the diagrams above, we can immediately identify the upward form of communication, which is from the workers to the management, the downward form of communication from the chief executive or management to the workers, the lateral form of communication between colleagues, and then the diagonal form of communication between functional units of the organization. Another route of communication within an organization is the informal route of communication. and this includes the grapevine. The grapevine is an unofficial channel through which news, gossip, and rumors travel. Usually, the origin of the information is unknown, but it spreads and spreads very fast amongst individuals, groups, and even organizations within the same industry. A rumor, on the other hand, is generally a story, a report, or statement that is circulated without any verifiable facts or certainty, while gossip is a malicious conversation about other people's private or personal lives. I am sure we can identify in one way or the other with these aspects of the informal route of communication. This should not be encouraged, and it is only going to happen if communication is effective within the organization. For communication, verbal or written, to be effective within an organization, it must possess some certain qualities that are essential for it to be effective. First and foremost, it must be candid, it must be sincere and honest. The staff of the organization should be able to take any communication from their management for what it is without having any doubts. The communication must be correct, it must be error-free. Then it must be concise. The less verbose the communication, the better the understanding. When there are too many words, it hinders the understanding of the communication. Then it must be concrete. That means that the core message must be explicitly stated. People know what this message is all about. They know the core focus of the message that is being presented, and it must be complete. It shouldn't be a situation where you provide half information to the staff for them to get more information either through the grapevine or through rumors as discussed earlier. And then there must be clarity in the communication. There must be clarity. There must be no ambiguity at all, so that when the staff read it, they know what exactly their management is talking about, and vice versa. There are so many things known as barriers that affect the transmission and understanding of what is communicated, whether among individuals or in organizations. In this session, these barriers will be identified and ways of mitigating them will be highlighted. Also known as noise, not the noise that we hear from the honking of car horns. Communication barriers hinder the proper communication, clarity, and understanding of the message being communicated, and they result in a couple of things. One is communication gap. In this case, there's a missing link in the message is incomplete. You will recall that we said that for communication to be effective, it has to be complete. So where there is communication gap, the receivers of the message are left no option than to fill in the gap based on assumption or get their information from other informal sources such as the grapevine. Miscommunication also occurs as a result of communication barriers, and it is the sending across of a wrong message. Where communication barriers exist, misunderstanding can arise. The receiver does not have the correct understanding of the message being transmitted. Wrong impressions can also occur as a result of communication barriers. The receiver of the message has an entirely different understanding of the message as intended by the sender. A very good example of the effect of communication barriers is a former senator in Nigeria who uses very verbose language, and most of the time, the result of his communication is miscommunication or misunderstanding by his listeners. It is important that we avoid communication barriers for our communication to be effective. I'm sure if you think well, you'll identify times that you have misunderstood what somebody wrote or said. And this could have happened for a variety of reasons. In the first instance, you could have a different perspective of the subject matter from that of the person that is sending the communication. You may also assume that you know what the person is about to say without listening and hearing the person out. These affect your understanding of what the message is about. When a communication is written in bad English, it also hampers our understanding of it because you are immediately put off once you start reading. Other things, barriers that can affect our communication, can be our gender, our religion, and our culture. Some things are acceptable down south and may not be acceptable up north. And in communicating, we must take that into consideration. Our emotions also affect our understanding of a communication. What we are going through at a particular point in time, it can becloud our understanding of the message. In addition, when there's too much information, what is called information overload, it hampers the understanding of a message. If what you are saying and your body language do not align, you can be rest assured that you'll be communicating a different message to your listener. And it is very, very important that all these inconsistencies, all these barriers are handled for us to be able to communicate our intended message to our listeners. In order to reduce the incidences of communication gap, miscommunication, misunderstanding, and wrong impression arising from the impact of communication barriers, action must be taken on the message that has been communicated, while a feedback mechanism should be adopted. This will ensure that issues are clarified. Also, staff should be encouraged to undergo training on developing their communication skills. Furthermore, using the relevant channels of communication within the organization across the different strata will also help to reduce the incidences of the effect of communication barriers. For instance, staff meetings and circulars can be used to communicate from management to staff, that is downward communication. And joint consultation committees and suggestion boxes can be used by the staff to communicate to their management. In addition, project groups, interdepartmental committees will enhance communication between functional groups in the organization. Listening is one of the language skills, and it is very key to communication. What we hear, how we hear, and interpret it determines our understanding of the message. This module outlines what listening is, the types, barriers, and characteristics of good listeners, and the strategies that can enhance our listening skills. Everyone seeks to be understood, and listening is very critical to understanding. Ralph Nicole says that the most basic of all human needs is the need to understand and be understood. The best way to understand people is to listen to them. Listening is therefore giving attention to sound or action, hearing what is being said, and making meaning out of it. It is very important that when we listen, we make meaning out of it. Active listening, that is listening with concentration, devoid of distractions, results in the understanding of the message being communicated. Listening is very critical to our human interactions. There are different types of listening. Listening for different purposes. Discriminatory listening is choosing to hear what you want to hear, and that is very common amongst a number of people. Then when we listen for comprehension, we listen to understand. Critical listening is when we listen to criticize. Biased listening is when we listen with preconceived notion of what the person is talking about. Evaluative listening is when we listen to gauge and assess the information that we are receiving. Appreciative listening occurs when we listen with the intent to show gratitude. Sympathetic or empathetic listening is when we listen to somebody in order to share in or identify with their feelings. This occurs most of the time when somebody has lost somebody. You identify with the person, you are sympathetic, and you are empathetic with the person. Then therapeutic listening occurs when we listen to proper solution to health or emotional challenges. And this occurs when we go to hospitals, the doctor listens to us and provides solutions to our health challenges. Barriers to listening. Just like we have barriers to communication, there are things that affect what we hear and how we hear what we hear. Preempting is a barrier to listening. In this situation, we're listening with the mindset of knowing what the person is about to say. Distractions affect what we hear. Noise, talking, doing other things while somebody is talking affects what we hear. When we are preoccupied with other things, such as writing, when somebody is talking, it affects our listening. Prejudice occurs when we have a preconceived idea. So whatever the person is saying doesn't make any difference to us. And then there is indifference. You really do not care, but you are just standing there and listening to what the person has to say. Anxiety affects our listening, affects what we hear. And of course, assumption and familiarity. If you know somebody too well and the person wants to give you a very serious advice, but it's somebody that you joke with all the time, you just assume that the person is not serious. So that also affects what we hear and how we hear what we hear. There are good and bad listeners. From some of the qualities that we're going to be discussing, you should be able to determine if you are a good or a bad listener. A good listener will pay attention to what is being said by focusing on the speaker, whereas a bad listener is distracted and is doing some other things while supposedly listening to what is being said. Critically, a good listener will listen to understand rather than listen to respond, which most people are guilty of. A good listener does not have an agenda at his back of his mind when he's listening. He's listening with an open mind. A good listener will not interrupt a speaker and will also ask for follow-up questions for clarity. A bad listener, on the other hand, will interrupt and may even want to take over the conversation by talking too much. He sees no need to seek clarification where necessary for proper understanding. Most good listeners are patient and show their involvement in the conversation or discussion through eye contact with the speaker, nodding, and repeating key phrases of the conversation. A bad listener, on the other hand, shows indifference by his body language. He doesn't indicate any interest in what is being said, does not paraphrase to show understanding. So tell me or determine for yourself, are you a good listener or you're a bad listener? To improve your active listening skills, that is listening with concentration devoid of distraction, you must be physically and psychologically present in the discussion. You are not doing other things as you are listening to the person that is talking. You must learn to focus on the speaker and show interest in the subject being discussed. And even in your environment, you must have presence in the discussion. Repeating key phrases and asking questions are also ways of showing that you are listening to what is being said. You must let the speaker finish before responding and ask for clarification where necessary. These strategies will help to improve your active listening skills. Communication can also be visual. Business information can be presented in statistical or graphical form, which are visual in nature. These form part of the non-verbal form of communication. In this module, we shall discuss some statistical and graphical forms of communication. Converting information to statistics, graphs, and visual illustration is useful for a number of reasons. They help to clarify complex information, which can be explained in an easier manner when presented in a graphical or statistical format. They also help to demonstrate a relationship between objects. For instance, information on a table can be converted into a pie chart, and this gives a better understanding of the information being passed across. Also, Traffic lights and signs are useful because they give direction in a traffic situation, while in a written text, photographs enhance the understanding of the text. Statistical representations are in the form of tables, graphs, and charts. Tables are used to summarize statistical and comparative data. They show precise details up to decimals, and they compare various items and indicators. They can be single, double, and multiple tables. Graphs, on the other hand, are used to display data. They show a relationship between two variables or quantities, and they aid the comparative analysis of data over a period of time. Graphs actually show a trend over a period of time, and they can be single, double, or multiple line graphs. Bar charts are used to represent values or category of data in the frequencies that they occur, and they are in the form of boxes rather than lines, as in the case of graphs. Pie charts present the fractional distribution of items that are being compared. At a glance, values in a pie chart should add up to 100% or 360 degrees. Visual illustration, on the other hand, are pictures, pictograms, cartoons, sketches, drawings, maps, signals, photographs, diagrams that also aid in communicating specific information. The words we use are a function of the words that we know. Having a rich vocabulary, that is a collection of words, improves our versatility and ability to communicate effectively. In this module on vocabulary development, the types of vocabulary will be explained, and how to develop a rich and robust vocabulary will be discussed. Vocabulary relates to all the words that are used in a particular language or field of study, like medicine, for instance. You will agree with me that the vocabulary in medicine is peculiar to medicine. Vocabulary also refers to a collection of words that an individual knows and uses. It is important that we constantly improve and build our vocabulary, and this can be done by consistently learning new words through reading. Whenever you come across a word you are not familiar with, it is advisable that you check up the meaning of the word and thereafter use it in the appropriate context. Building our vocabulary makes us versatile and enhances our communication with others. Every individual has a speaking, a writing, a reading, and recognition vocabulary. The speaking vocabulary is made up of words that we use mainly in conversations. The writing vocabulary is made up of words which we speak and pick from our readings. The reading vocabulary is made up of our speaking and writing vocabularies, in addition to that which we can define when we see it. The recognition vocabulary, on the other hand, is made up of the other three types of vocabularies, and the words that we recognize and guess their meanings when they are used in context. What this means is you may not have a prior knowledge of the meaning of the word, but based on the usage in a particular context, you can guess the meaning. So these are the types of vocabularies that we have, and which, when we develop, it makes us more versatile in communicating. One way to enhance and build our vocabulary is to know the different types of words that we use, so that we can use them in the correct context. There are three main types of words: synonyms, antonyms, and homonyms. Synonyms are words that have a similar meaning. Example, the word type, T-Y-P-E. Another word for it can be kind, K-I-N-D, style, a sort, or category. Antonyms are words that are opposite in meaning. So for example, the word abhor, A-B-H-O-R. The antonym for it can be like, it can be adore. Homonyms, on the other hand, are words with similar sounds or pronunciation, but with different spellings and meanings. For instance, L-I-E, lie, can mean untruth, and it can also mean rest. We'll be looking at homonyms in the next slide. Homonyms are made up of homophones and homographs. Homophones are words that have the same sounds and pronunciation but different spelling and meanings. For example, pair, P-A-I-R, a pair of two things, and P-E-A-R, a fruit. S-I-N, sin, as in transgression, and S-E-E-N, sin, when you have seen something. Right, R-I-G-H-T, when something is correct, and W-R-I-T-E, when you write something down. Homographs are words with the same spellings but different meanings. Example, L-I-G-H-T can mean something that is not heavy, light, and it also means a lamp. L-I-E means rest, and it could also mean insincerity. While L-E-F-T means the western side of the body, while L-E-F-T means the past tense of leaf. So we can see the different types of homonyms and the different types of words. In understanding them, it helps us to use them in the right context. In verbal and written communication, common errors occur which can distort the meaning of the message being communicated. In this module, we will examine some of the common errors with the objective of correcting them and enhancing our spoken and written English. One of the common errors that occur in English is the error of agreement. A singular subject must have a singular verb form, while a plural subject must have a plural verb form. For instance, one of the women was guilty is correct, while one of the women were guilty is wrong. This is because the subject of this sentence is one of the women and not all the women. Another error is the error of indefinite pronouns, such as anyone, someone, no one, none, neither, or either. When they are used with either, nor, or all, they are singular and should take a singular verb and be followed by he or him or his and not they, them, or theirs. For example, no one knows his future, not no one knows their future. Anyone can do it if she tries her best, not anyone can do it if they try their best. Another common error in English is the error of collective nouns. Collective nouns are groups of persons or things which take a singular verb when considered as a complete singular unit. For example, the class is too large. You will not say or write that the class are too large. The comparative and superlative also appear as a form of error in English. The comparative applies to two. For example, he's the better footballer of the two, whereas the superlative applies to three or more. For example, he's the best student in the class. It would be wrong to say that John is the tallest of the two brothers because we're talking about two people. It would be right to say John is the taller of the two brothers. Some errors occur in English as a result of the confusion in the usage of certain words. For example, each other and one other, between and among. Each other and between refer to two people or things, while one other and among refer to more than two. For example, in the fight, they hurt each other. It means two people were fighting. The girls in the class were fighting one another. It implies that more than two girls were fighting. The two core members shared the money between themselves. Two people shared the money. When we understand and use these words correctly, it enhances our communication correctly. Reading is one of the four language skills. It is a way of enhancing our vocabulary. We will look at the purpose, benefits, and strategies for effective reading in this module. Reading is the process of interpreting written words and symbols. It draws on the prior knowledge of the reader to enhance the understanding of the text. When we read, we use our eyes to receive written symbols, letters, punctuation marks, and spaces, and we use our brain to convert them into words, sentences, and paragraphs that communicate something to us. It is both a receptive skill through which we receive information and a productive skill when we read out and pronounce the words that we read. Reading has its purposes and benefits. As students, we read to acquire knowledge. We also read for leisure and for information. As stated earlier, when we read, we broaden our vocabulary and by extension improve our writing skills. Other benefits of reading include the development of our comprehension skills, because in order to understand, we will seek to know the meaning of unfamiliar words and sharpen our minds and our memory. Some people have found that reading relieves them of stress, so it is a form of leisure for them. We must learn to read in order to improve ourselves. We have all experienced the different types of reading at some point in time or the other. Skimming is reading without paying serious attention to details, while scanning involves reading to pick out specific words, facts, and information. When we engage in intensive reading, attention is paid to details, meaning, logic, coherence, etc. Such as when we read contracts, we want to read in between the lines to be sure that we are covered on all sides. Extensive reading, on the other hand, is when we read to cover many materials in a short time and attention is paid superficially to the content. Example, when we read newspapers, magazines, etc. The detailed study reading, which is also known as XQ3R, that is survey, question, reading, recall, and review, is done when writing a research project and academic studies. Other forms of reading include silent reading, loud reading when you read out loud, and shared reading when you join others to read a text. As with every skill that we seek to develop, we must have strategies for improving our reading and to read effectively. So to ensure effective reading exemplified in proper understanding of what is read, it is important that at the onset of the reading, a reading objective is set. Why am I reading this book? What information do I want to get? What improvements do I want to gain? This objective is assessed throughout the reading process by stopping at intervals to ask questions, to make connection between what you already know and what you are reading. It also helps to visualize and take notes when reading, as this aids remembrance. Another strategy for effective reading is that in the final analysis, you must be able to identify the most important thing to you from what you have read. These strategies should be recognizable because as students, we would have adopted some of them when we were studying. As a recap, in this section of business communication, we have looked at communication in general, verbal and non-verbal communication, organizational communication, statistical and visual illustration in communication, how to develop our vocabulary, common errors in English which can distort our communication, and how to listen, write, and read effectively. As attention is paid to all these aspects of communication, we expect to become better communicators. Thank you.